Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite Go to Market podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have another special guest. We have Kunal Pandya, who is the VP of Global Revenue Enablement at Corsearch. And we're going to be nerding out on all things, enablement leadership, strategy, coaching and practice. And really excited to have you here today, Kunal.
I appreciate you having me. Yeah, and really look forward to our discussion.
Amazing. Well, before we dive into, all things data-driven enablement, would
Mm.
love to hear a bit about yourself, how you found your way into sales enablement, and kind of some key lessons you picked up along the way.
It's a funny thing, right? Because nobody really intends to go into enablement. It just kind of
Yeah.
lands there.
Sales leadership enablement, it's not the thing, you're
Right.
6 years old and, picture when you're, in your career, that's what we're going to do. So, yeah.
Absolutely. But no, I've been in the tech space pretty much all of my career, really. From academically, I've been in tech. Started off in kind of software development, moved on to more project management. Did a stint kind of on the IT side of things. Then started working for a very early stage SaaS firm. Going back sort of just before the global financial crisis, actually, which is a great time to get into that
Yeah.
space.
Take a risk. Yeah. Great
2008,
timing.
yeah. But that's when I first kind of started to do more enablement type activities, although it wasn't truly an enablement role at the time. Usually how it happens, right? And that role progressed. There was an acquisition that moved more into an enablement role. And then I found a space for me, which was, how do I help these tech firms, majority of which were kind of Silicon Valley based tech firms, to grow, build fast, accelerate their scaling up, and use enablement as that weapon to do it all to achieve the exit that the investors and the founders were aiming to achieve. So I did that a few times, and then I realized actually I'm pretty good at this thing, right, and helping these companies grow. So
Yeah.
obviously learned a lot in doing all of that. And in between that, there was also a few acquisitions in terms of exits. One of the acquisitions was to SAP, where I spent a bit of time as well, kind of seeing how they do it.
And they're kind of
And so,
famous for
yeah.
some of their training programs and enablement and whatnot as well, right?
I mean, they were obviously a beast of a company, right?
Yeah.
And you talk to anybody, and they'll say that they do enablement, right, pretty much. And we're talking about a 50,000 person company.
Yeah.
So, but they're very mature in that space. They've got a lot of experience and knowledge, and it was great to see that. And that kind of helped me refine some of the things that I do, especially when it comes to that more data-driven approach.
Amazing. Amazing. And maybe one key lesson before we get into, what you're up to today that you learned
Mm.
along your kind of journey through those different roles and kind of experimenting, in terms of, how to really prove ROI of enablement programs, because that's a big topic. I'm excited to dig in with you. And this has been a consistent topic. I mean, just the last 3+ years with enablement teams, having to prove their worth. How do you think about, what are some of those lessons you've learned around how to prove that like hard ROI to maybe a CFO stakeholder who might not intuitively understand what
Yeah.
you're up to?
I think the first lesson was really the realization that we have to do this. And my
Yes, that's
my
a great place
personal
to start. Is yeah,
right.
it's part of your job. It is not.
It is not
Yes,
an option anymore. I
yes,
mean, maybe it's been optional in the past, and maybe some, CROs, company leaders, executives have allowed it to be optional because they didn't know that this thing could be done, right? But the first realization is it has to happen. And my personal experience of that was when I was sitting in a QBR, and the reps talked about a pretty sizable deal which they had closed, which whilst, obviously I wasn't a quota carrier or anything like that, had significantly coached that rep to get done what needed to be done. Had delivered a lot of the things that helped them to ramp and onboard in the beginning, and then continued all of that through various enablement learning, tech, you name it, across the broad spectrum. And you're in the QBR and you get zero credit, right? And then you suddenly realize, hang on, marketing are there getting all this credit for the lead generation and demand generation. The sales engineering solution consulting team did some amazing demos. Hat tips to them. The sales leader and the sales rep themselves are going to get all the credit naturally. Isn't it high time that enablement was part of this conversation? Because let's face it, if a lot of, this is what I'm thinking in my head, if I hadn't done a lot of the things I did, especially with that one rep, would they have closed that deal? Probably not. Maybe not at the level they closed it at, maybe not in the time they closed it at, right?
Yeah.
Maybe all those kind of things. So that was my personal realization. This has to change. The second realization was just after COVID, when suddenly the markets just flipped on their heads, right? And a lot of companies were investing in enablement, going large on enablement, SDR functions, all those kind of things. And suddenly they realized, well, what's the value here? What are we actually getting, right? And especially from an enablement perspective, who were focused on predominantly training, onboarding, and maybe content production and management, that kind of thing. Do we really need that? Well, we're not hiring anybody, so what's the value of onboarding?
Yeah. And how do you tie that back to a closed won deal? How do you tie that back to what you just said, the delta of this closed 3 months sooner, or
Yeah.
this was 3 times the average contract value because we were able to do this instead of that?
Right. And they quite often they weren't even asking that question. It was just a case of, we don't need that team anymore. We don't need that individual, right? And we saw the amount of layoffs that happened across enablement, and that opened my eyes that we have to change. We have to do something different here. It's not just us leaving it to executives to figure it out. We have to help them, and we have to make the shift.
Totally.
That's where I was coming from. That's kind of what got me doing these kind of things.
Amazing. Well, it's a perfect transition to kind of the meat of it today. We're going to talk about data-driven enablement, how we can have some of those executive level conversations around the impact of investing in enablement. And the first question for you is, for someone who might be coming in to their role or already in a role that, leadership might see this as a potential cost center versus really understanding kind of the more strategic side of things. What's a piece of advice you'd give to folks to kind of shift that narrative? Because I don't think it's uncommon for, even if people say, oh yeah, enablement's help, like deep down, I do think a lot of, especially sales leaders, don't really value. They think they're doing it all themselves and they don't think it's really needed. How do you help someone that's in, a strategic role like yourself have those conversations internally and make it black and white that this is, what we're delivering, and without us, XYZ wouldn't be happening?
So when we think about data-driven enablement, data-driven is a byproduct of strategic enablement, right? Without the data-driven aspect, there is no strategic enablement, right? That's not me making up the rules. It's just the way businesses run. But also, importantly, it's just the way that executives make decisions, right?
With numbers,
with numbers and insight, right? Actionable insight. So when it comes to strategic enablement, kind of an advice that I would give, well, what are the 3 facets of strategic enablement? There's 3 facets to it. The first facet is what you just mentioned, is the data-driven aspect, right? Data analysis. And with that comes things like revenue, right? Ultimately, is a data point. It's probably the data point, right? Because that's why we all do what we do. And it's more specifically, well, what is our revenue gap? Meaning, what did we just do, or where are we forecasted to get to versus where we need to be? And there's usually a gap in between the two. That's one data point, the gap. That's what we are trying to bridge as enablement. So the next piece is, well, what are the key levers of revenue that drive that gap? We're thinking things like win rate, pipeline generation, average deal values, length of sales cycle, all these kind of things. They're the key levers that drive that revenue gap ultimately. But it's not just enough to understand the benchmarks, right? So is a 20% win rate good or bad? I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you what it really means is, the benchmark, it paints the picture, but it's the trends that tell the story, right? So what was win rate last year, last quarter, 3 quarters ago, right? Are we going up or are we going down? And if we're going up or down in any direction, how do we break that down into our cohorts? Perhaps maybe one region versus another, maybe sales of one product versus another, maybe enterprise versus corporate, all those kind of things, segmentation perhaps. How does that differ? Because you might still find that whilst win rate is going up, actually your enterprise is going down. And over time, that's going to impact, right?
Yeah, we're selling more smaller deals. So yes, we're winning more, but yeah, we switched our pricing strategy and actually net we're actually producing less.
And that's where the other levers come into play,
Yeah.
like average deal values.
Yeah.
And now suddenly you will find that, okay, it's maybe stable in the corporate side, but on the enterprise side, it's going down.
Yeah.
But the key point here is how do we understand those stories and how do we translate that into simulations? Meaning, okay, in order for us to bridge that revenue gap, what do we need to, which lever do we pull? Is it win rate? If so, by how much? So which lever do we pull? When do we pull it? But also how hard do we pull it? Right?
Yeah.
Those questions build out your enablement strategy.
So dollars
Right?
and cents, how do you tie? Because
Mm,
you gave that example earlier of like, an AE closes a deal. They give
mm.
credit to the marketing team for sourcing it or influencing at an executive dinner they put together in certain cities.
Yeah.
And then, the SE that did this amazing demo and got the technical win and the executive sponsor, blah, blah, blah. How do you make sure when so we set up, we have this gap, we set up our assumptions and hypotheses for win rates. How do you make sure that you're tying things that enablement is already doing, or should be doing
Yeah.
to those numbers? Like, I think that's really where I see people struggle.
Yeah. The biggest struggle that's often understated is that. So kind of I mentioned a data piece, right, which is the first aspect. The second aspect is around just the actual enablement strategy, which data is driving,
Yes.
the execution of that strategy, but then also the impact measurement of that strategy, right? Now, all of that's good and well, but the third facet of kind of strategic enablement is what I call the art of storytelling. It's a tricky one, right? And this is the one where when enablers typically think about it, they think, you know what, I'm just not going to do this thing. I'm just going to keep going where I'm at, because that is the one that is probably the most dangerous. And the reason why I say that is because imagine you're sitting in front of a CRO and they've invited you to maybe the board meeting to talk about what's been going on, and the CFO's there, and you start talking numbers. You start talking about win rates going up and down. You start talking about what you did to impact that, how easily that can be shot down, right?
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to data, right? Is
That's
the
what I
data
mean.
even
Is like, oh, well,
right?
that's because we launched this product. So,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Then the question becomes, right? Well, the product was launched, but who enabled the team on actually going to market with that,
Yeah.
right? And actually delivering value-based demos and all of that kind of thing. So there's certainly things there. So the art of storytelling is really, I look at it, I break it up into a few things. One is, for those of you who might be familiar with Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, to start with the why, how, and what, is how do we articulate it in that fashion? That's the first thing. So why did we do a certain thing? How did we actually impact it? And then the what doesn't really matter. It's just an enablement program. The mistake that so many revenue leaders and enablers make is they start with the what. Let's run negotiation training.
Yeah.
Let's do objection handling training.
So
And
they
then we
put
kind of,
themselves in this kind of unstrategic tactical thing, and the language
yeah,
that they're using, we talk a lot about this in our own sales training, is like,
yeah,
are you speaking your buyers or your the
that's
right
it.
stakeholders language? You're
Yeah,
talking to a fellow enabler practitioner when
yeah,
you're talking to the CFO. Maybe
yeah,
that's why they don't understand the
100%.
ROI, because you're literally speaking French to someone who
Yeah,
speaks Greek.
100%.
Yeah.
Which is why those three facets really work together, right? The data piece, the strategic piece, and then now there's a storytelling piece. And it all starts with the revenue gap, right? And it circles back there as well. Now, of course, the language of the C-suite or executives needs to be taken into account here. We're talking dollar signs. We're talking correlation as well, right? And proving that correlation. And the key thing to remember is enablement doesn't directly impact revenue. So we cannot state that. We don't want to say that either. But what we can impact are the layers below that that drives the levers of revenue.
Yeah. The behaviors that
So
drive revenue. Yeah.
behaviors, capability, competence, all those kind of things,
Yeah.
processes, playbooks, right? All those kind of things. What those behaviors and capabilities drive is a team's ability to execute. Think of that as activity execution, and it's the execution of those activities which drives the levels of revenue. When you rate all those now, if we can prove that, first of all, the why, right? Thinking of the golden circle, the why. Why are we doing this? Because there's a revenue gap. Okay, but the revenue gap can be bridged slightly if we impact win rate by say 2%, right? And for $100 million company, that's a significant amount of money, right?
Yeah.
So 2% is the impact we're trying to impact by. Who are the people in the organization who actually deliver, say, a 25% win rate, and who are the people who do 15%? What makes them different? Okay, it's this thing. Maybe it's their ability to deliver a value-led conversation around the business case or ROI or those kind of things. The question is, okay, those people do 25%, those people who don't do 15%. What if we got those 15%ers up to the same level, capability-wise? Do we think that's going to have an impact on win rate? And the leaders would typically say, yeah, it should in theory, right? There's a lot of work goes into that, of course, and there's a program behind it, there's reinforcement, there's certification maybe, there's tech tools, everything, right? But the point is we've got a little bit of buy-in from the beginning. The storytelling part doesn't happen at the end. Such a misconception when it comes
Sounds like
to
a
enablement.
sale, Kunal. Sounds like you're describing it, the irony of
100%.
of enablers. It sounds like a
Yeah.
lot of them not able to kind of practice what they to kind of challenge folks in a way is like if you're
Yeah.
trying to tell sellers they need to be doing this in value selling, it sounds like a big gap is taking for granted maybe
Yeah.
that your peers don't see the world the same way as you do and that you need to be
That's
driving that from day one.
It's a great point. It's a great observation. It is sales, right? It's uncovering challenges and pain. It's quantifying
Yeah.
impact of pain. It's
Upfront
delivering a
commitment on all
solution.
these things. Hey, if if this is the thing we agree on and I do this and this
Right.
happens, then
Yeah.
this was because of
Yeah.
this. And you're right, you're saying
Right.
a lot of people do that after.
Now, let's say this is happening, and
Yeah.
you've got that buy-in, and you've got that little bit of alignment up front before you do the thing, right?
Yeah.
That's where it really matters, and that's where we often don't do it. But now you've done the thing, and we've got to remember is we don't impact the lagging indicators, we impact the leading indicators, some of the leading indicators, right? Especially
Yeah.
around behavioral capability, competence, maybe even execution. But if we can show that there's a clear path between impacting that, we had the buy-in up front, right? Let's say, yeah, if we were to do business cases better and suddenly every deal worth over 20K is getting a business case attached to it, we're having better conversations because we've seen that through our conversation intelligence, we scorecarded it. We're delivering the value-led conversations, and we're even seeing a conversion impact in that stage of the cycle to the next stage. That, in theory, should convert to that win rate,
Yeah.
right? Now, if we can show that even visually and show how, bearing in mind we had buy-in up front, it makes that conversation so much easier.
So how do you baseline that, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking about before and after. What I've seen in practice is a lot of people, let alone not even having, a scorecard on it or benchmark, is having those things in the first place, right? We're talking about, let's say improving business cases, or we're not engaging with the right senior level stakeholders. Let's say we want to say before it's this, after it's that. We don't even really confidently have a before in 90% of cases that I see, even well-run organizations. So I'm curious, how do you kind of help solve for that piece?
That's another challenge, right? So how do you solve for the before and after? That's a diagnosis. That's the gap, right? And if those of you familiar with gap setting, that's it.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, there is a sales aspect to this, which is what is happening today and why is that happening, and what are the benchmarks associated with that level of behavior, capability, whatever it is, whether it's top performance or average or even lower performance, right? What's the benchmark we're seeing?
Yeah.
Now, if we're seeing trends being going down, for example, in certain areas, again, the question is why? Why is that? It's all a matter of diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know. I mean, I could talk about this one piece of enablement
Yeah.
again because it's just like every conference I go to, every kind of enablement focused discussion the last 3 years feels like it's really about more than ever we need this, and it feels like harder to get for our sales organizations.
Right.
But to kind of shift gears, because I know you got a Jet in 3, would love to hear who and what has inspired you to kind of be kind of pushing the envelope and kind of helping educate the market and fellow enablers in this way of thinking, to try to again be more strategic and kind of elevate to that C-suite level.
Yeah, a couple of names come to mind. I remember when I first kind of went to my first Revenue Enablement Society meet, there was a few people around there who were kind of like, wow, yeah, these guys. One of those who I don't think was there in person, but was dialed in, was a guy called Scott Santucci, who can be considered one of the founders of what is modern day enablement. Got a great career track record, and some of his work is just outstanding in terms of dissecting the technicalities of sales and go to market. So if you're not following him, please do. Also, another individual called Mike Kunkel. He's the founder of the building blocks of sales enablement, right? And one of those blocks happens to be around ROI and revenue impact. A believer in all these things, also a skeptic, which has challenged me personally and helped keep me on my toes. But I think a combination of those two guys, and there's so many others in the field that I've met very early on in my career, that have helped to shape how I think about this, challenge how I think about it, change direction, change tact to get me to the point I'm at today.
Amazing. And anything that so definitely follow those folks. We'll link in some of the descriptions here.
Yeah.
But any resources that you constantly find yourself, going back to, every year, or, any new job or new project, like what are the things that you're like, oh, like every time, you check that out, whether it's a book or resource or podcast or something like that you feel like would be worth sharing with the audience here?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of podcasts and books, that I've read. I mean, when it comes to enablement very specifically, there's so many communities now that focus on enablement. And if I'm a sales enablement professional, I'm kind of entering this space and starting my career, I would definitely recommend things like the Revenue Enablement Society. There's even a Sales Enablement Collective, which is the community. There's the Enablement Squad as well. There's a bunch of communities out there. Attend the events. It's the single most impactful way to kind of learn. And it's so easy to not do these things because you get stuck in a job and you get into that cycle and you just don't have time.
Yeah.
Attend the events, make the time, because even to this date, even last week I was attending an event and I learned something, and I'll do something different as a result. So really just to sign up to these groups and join up to the local events where you can.
I love it. Yeah. And even with us building in this space, I found going there, getting your hands on, hearing the conversations, like the real challenges, it's so different. It really sinks in when you're there in person. Not just listening to things like this, and but yeah, being there and being super engaged and kind of slowing down outside of the day job, but tough to do. But speaking of which, I'll let you get back to the 1,000,001 things you got going on, Kunal. But it was awesome having you on the podcast, and excited to share this one with fellow enablement professionals.
Absolutely, great to be here, and thanks for having me.